Nick hadn't recovered from our last case, and that worried me. As a last resort, he had used a power of his no one really knew much about. It got us out of a bad situation, but it came with a drawback. The first time he used it, he was on bed rest for weeks. Now he was finding it hard to stay on his feet for very long. It was impossible to tell how long he would be out of commission for. At least Abarash was looking after him. Out of the blue, she sent me a message asking to meet by a coffee shop near my office. I was told there was an open job. Not a word about how Nick was doing. It was strange she would ask me to do a case without him. When I arrived, she was walking out with a coffee in her hand. She had already asked if I wanted one, but I said no. She was alone, confirming Nick was still forced to stay on bed rest. I forgot about him for a second when she leaned over to place a kiss on my cheek. Seeing my reaction caused her to let out an unflattering giggling that made her even more charming in my eyes. Clearing my throat, I dove into why she had called. Is there really a job I can do on my own? I asked once she stopped laughing. Not alone. You've been requested by another agent to provide some help. It's a simple gathering job, so we figured you can handle it, she said and took a sip of her coffee. She made a face as it was still too hot. Do they know I'm human? My eyebrow was raised at the idea of anyone asking for my help. It made sense other agents could borrow help if needed. I'd just never seen anyone switch partners before. For the most part, partners stayed together, since I was only a contract worker and not a real part of the corporation. Nick lacked a real partner and sometimes needed to go off to do jobs with different teams. He knows. Like I said, it's an easy job. Anyone can do it, but no one wants to. Do you own rubber boots by chance? That question raised some red flags. I shook my head and Abarash led me to her car. She took out a pair of rubber boots that went up to my knees. I switched shoes and she said she would return mine after the job. She also pulled out some clips and a belt. I really started to second guess taking this job when she clipped the boots to my pants and handed over the belt to keep my jeans very tightly on. This felt a bit ridiculous. Being human and not an agent, I really couldn't complain and should just take whatever jobs I was given. I'll use my car door to drop you off. The other agent is already there and can explain everything once you arrive. You'll have no problems, I promise. Maybe some wet socks and that's it. Due to how much I cared about Abarash, I fully trusted her. She wasn't going to send me into a lion's den without any kind of protection. I didn't even need a weapon for this case. Closing her door, she pulled out an iron skeleton key. I'd seen it being used before. It was magic and could be used to connect two doors together for travel. No one ever explained the differences between using a transportation spell or a key. I assumed the key cost less magic to use. She put the key into a lock on her door where the key normally wouldn't fit. With a click, the view inside that one window changed. The rest of them showed the inside of her car, while the one revealed a misty white place. She opened the door, some fog rolling out from where I was meant to go. With a few encouraging words, I ducked through her door and came out in a completely different place. When I looked back, she waved at me and shut the door behind me. The one I came out of did not match the dimensions of the door I'd just come in through. It was a plain wooden one with white peeling paint and it stood in wet ground. I understood the reason for the boots. The fog was clearing, giving me a better idea of the area around me. It was a flat marsh or a bog. The ground I stood on was solid compared to the rest that was slightly visible through the white fog. My breath caught when I saw a tall figure through the mist, so tall it might as well be double my height. I thought it must be the other agent, but I still didn't feel right without a weapon. The shape of whoever was walking towards me felt off somehow. When they drew closer, I could finally see that the strange outline was because they were carrying something. Oh, you're shorter than I expected, came a pleased voice that eased some of the tension. When the other agent stopped in front of me, I could see him much better. His skin was a light greenish tint with countless brown spots layered on top. His hair was a tangled mess of weeds and twigs. Bright golden eyes looked down as a wide smile creased his face. He wore a headband to keep the mess out of his face so he could see. His clothing was woven together from scraps of fabrics he found. A suit jacket tied around his waist showed me he was an agent. In one hand he held a long woven wicker basket with straps. I'm the deep marsh set off in the east, he said in the same kind tone. That was a very long name to say each time. I introduced myself hoping he had a nickname. Everyone calls me Marsh though. Here, I'll explain what we're doing. Handing over the basket, he looked around along the ground to find something. Walking on the wet ground in bare feet, he bent over to pull a plant up from the roots. It was about 10 inches tall including the stalk and had bulbs tightly attached. I've never seen a plant like it before. We're collecting these today. They're called Creepypastas. I snorted at the name. He demonstrated why the plant gained such a silly title. Pulling off one of the bulbs, he pressed it between two fingers until it cracked open with a very odd sound exactly like the word Pippi. He then placed the plant in the basket strapped to his back. They're a good base for a lot of medicines. The trouble is they only grow in places like this, and no one wants to be here. My partner refused to come and we are running low on stock, so I looked to see if anyone else was available, and here you are. The basket I gave you transports the plants directly to the processing center, but only these plants. You can put other stuff inside it like a normal basket if you need though. So far, so good. Nothing sounded dangerous. Aside from how creepy the bog was, and how hard it would be to walk around, it would be an easy job. Marsh started to walk towards a puddle, but instead of sinking in, he walked right over the water, showing how well suited he was for this particular job. Is there anything else I should know about this job? I asked, following close behind. No, nothing I can think of, Marsh said with a smile. His top sharp teeth poked out and covered his entire bottom lip in an odd expression. The first step caused me to sink down almost to my knees. Struggling, I tried to pull my foot free to only get the other stuck. Nash watched as I wiggled in the mud, unable to walk forwards. Without some help, I wouldn't be able to do anything. Marsh walked back over and pulled out some of his grass-like hair. With quick long fingers, he wove it into a necklace. He put it around my neck and lifted me from the mud by grabbing from under my arms. With a pop, I was free but had almost lost a boot. The necklace should help you walk along better. You won't sink like that. True to his word, the next few steps were much easier. My foot still sank down to the ankles, but it was manageable. I was now ready to look around for the plants we were there to collect. They grew in abundant patches. Some gloves would have been nice for pulling the plants out of the mud. The roots came with it. When I tossed them inside the basket, they disappeared when they hit the bottom. Any mud or worms attached to the plants stayed in the bottom of the basket. After a while, I needed to tip it over to dump out the leftovers back into the bog. Marsh stayed within sight. With all the fog, I couldn't see what the area really looked like. It felt as if it was endless. I looked back, not seeing the door we had started from. The agent was very quick at collecting, finding plants and scooping them up into the basket within seconds. Do you live in a place like this? I asked over my shoulder, trying to start up a conversation. Oh, something like this. In a way, I am a place like this. But I got bored, so took on a body to see what else was out there, Marsh said between gathering plants. I've never heard of a place turning into a person before. It's kind of neat. One of the Pippy-Pop's plant was stuck in the mud. I kept pulling, expecting it to lift up. The rest were so easy to grab, I wasn't expecting the resistance. Marsh watched the struggle. The toothy smile came back. I refused to cave in and ask for help. Using both hands and a bit of swearing, I put all my body weight into the battle. I fell back, plant in hand, but I lost in the end. I fell into the mud, sinking a little and getting filthy. I heard Marsh laughing at my now soaking jeans. Holding the plant in one hand, I was about to toss it inside the basket when I found out why it took so much effort. Tangled in the roots was a dirty shape dripping in mud. There was a puddle within arm's reach, so I dunked the roots, trying to see what I pulled up. When I saw what it was, I dropped the whole thing. I was staring at a bone. It belonged to a large animal, or, I feared, a person. Did I find a dead body? I asked, voice shaken a little. Oh yeah, probably. The Pippy-Pops tends to grow better on top of the dead. Donning a grim smile, he raised his hands to wiggle his long fingers and spoke in a voice as if he was telling a ghost story. It was rumored that a cruel king slaughtered countless of his subjects in order to feed less mouths. As punishment for his greed, his lands turned into useless bogs. The bones of his victims forever remained at the bottom, reaching up, searching for him to drag him down. Marsh let out another laugh. He took the plant and untangled the bone from the roots. Without a second thought, he tossed the bone aside, letting it plop back into the mud. The heartless way he treated it didn't sit well with me. Even if it was from just an animal, I still thought it should be given more respect. He also started to pick the remaining plants in the spot, knowing I wouldn't go near it. Shouldn't we check to see if it's a person or not? I asked, as he hummed while he worked. Pausing, he stared at me, not understanding the question. In his mind, a dead animal and a dead human were the same thing. He waved off my concern. This is a graveyard. It's where the bodies should be, don't worry about it. It's just a bit different from most burial sites you've seen. Staring down at where the long bone was slowly sinking back into the mud, I thought about his answer. It didn't feel right to just leave it here. Overall, he was right. People were buried in different places and different ways, respectfully. I couldn't come in and decide it wasn't and drag through the mud to remove bodies because of my own comfort level. I stood up, soaked in mud, ready to get back on task. If I found more bones, I would still be a little rattled by it, even if I now knew it was a possibility. Our conversation died down for a while. Unable to take the silence, I started up with some questions. What's your partner like? I asked over my shoulder. Marsh stopped, looking up at the white sky, chewing on his lip. He comes from a rich family. We get our cases done easy enough, but I really don't understand his obsession over wealth. Places don't need money after all. It must be difficult having a partner you didn't know very well. I took what he said as them not getting along and just working together because they needed to. I couldn't imagine being able to finish any cases if me and Nick didn't work well with each other. So far, most of our jobs got finished because we trusted one another with our lives. And luck. A lot of luck. I've never met a place before. What were you like before you had a body like this? That was a good question to ask. Marsh's face lit up, showing he didn't often have a chance to talk about this topic. He quickly launched into painting a picture of what he was before. A large marshland filled with all sorts of life I never would have expected to be able to survive in a place so damp and depressing. It really gave me a better opinion of them overall. When he took up a body, the place remained behind. It was, however, locked away from any newcomers and humans. The animals and plants that lived there before stayed. If he died in his current body, the entire marsh and everything inside it would as well. It was a bit risky. He was going to return back at some point, but wanted to see another way of living for a while longer. With the plants disappearing, I didn't have any idea of how many we had collected so far. When our conversation died down, Marsh walked over holding out his hand. I nervously held mine out to accept what he was offering. Normally, when people extend an enclosed hand like this, they're about to hand someone a bug. He dropped a small dirty object in my palm that thankfully didn't have any legs. Inside the bog, he found a ring. I rubbed it against my shirt trying to clean it. Dull gold came through when I got as much mud off as possible. It's neat, but we should keep it where you found it, I said, offering it back. I can sense something from it. We could bring it back and have the corporation look at it. The person who owned it before isn't using it, and we need as many magic items as we can find. He dismissed my hand, forcing me to keep holding the ring. Frowning, I looked at the small object. Logically, he was right. On principle, he was a bit wrong. Aside from the plants, it wasn't right to take anything from this place. Maybe we should. I started and looked up only to find Marsh missing. He was standing right in front a second ago. The place was flat. There was nothing to hide behind, and he didn't just sink into the mud. There weren't even any ripples left behind from where he might have walked. I called out his name, expecting a response. Shoving the ring into my pocket to think about later, I took a few steps forwards, trying to find the agent. If he was playing a joke, it wasn't funny in the slightest. The fog was growing heavy and blocking my view past a few feet. In that wall of fog, I started to hear sounds. Straining, I stopped to listen, trying to figure out what I was hearing. A sound came from nearby, causing me to look over. My body turned cold as I saw something emerging through the mud. The ground was making sickening sounds as the shape broke free. A hand made of nothing but mud-covered bones reached through to start pulling the rest of the body up. Staring off into the fog now revealed faint outlines of thin shapes. I didn't wait around. I moved as fast as I could, looking for Marsh. I hadn't kept track of where we started and had no idea which way the door out of here was. My feet were slipping in the slick ground. My face was dripping with sweat from fear and effort. More and more of those hands rose up, dragging skeleton bodies with them. They moved slower than me. That didn't matter. Soon I would be overwhelmed by them all. A hand caught my foot and with immense strength started to pull it down. More of them came, grabbing at my slippery boots. They dug into the rubber, threatening to cut through. I was helpless. No matter how hard I pulled, I couldn't get out of their grip. I screamed Marsh's name, expecting him to swoop in any second now. He didn't appear. The mud was up to my knees as those arms shot up and grabbed my own. So many hands grabbing and dragging me down into the wet, soft ground. I took a deep breath the second before my head went under. It was dark and cold. The mud was flooding my nose. It felt as if I was dying just seconds after being dragged down. I thought I heard whispering, countless voices begging for something I couldn't make out. My lungs felt as if they were about to burst already. All of those hands were desperately pawing, looking for something. A thought clicked into my head: the ring. They must be looking for that ring. Blindly, I reached my hand towards my pocket, trying to grab it. Those dead hands getting in the way. If they would just let me do this, I would give back what we found. Head pounding and chest tight, I slipped my hand inside my damp pocket. Then darkness overtook my senses. I was aware of another set of hands, a pair that dragged me back to the surface and were wiping away the muddy water from my face as I passed out a second time. I wasn't sure if I was the one who got the ring from my pocket in time, or if those dead hands retrieved it. The sound of rain woke me up. I was on my back, dizzy and sick to my stomach. A worried face was looking down on me. The sky was being covered by a large and wide leaf, acting as an umbrella. It shielded part of us from the downpour. My waist and legs were getting soaked, but at least it washed away some of the dirt. I think I ate some worms. I groaned, coughing up what was in the back of my throat. I was alive, but at what cost? While I was out, Marsh did his best to clean my face. My hair was still caked in dirt though. He let out a nervous laugh, seeing I was all right enough to be annoyed. I got out from under the leaf so I could attempt to wash my hair in the rain. It was a bad idea. Soon I was freezing and my teeth were chattering. Mar raised the leaf up again and took off a layer of a long stitched-up blanket he used as clothing. Somehow, it was dry. Wrapping it over my shoulders, he then started to guide us along. Our plant collecting job was clearly over. "Do you think you're all right? No lasting damage?" he asked after a while. I nodded. Aside from being wet and cold, and now with some new nightmare material, I was fine. Off in the distance I spotted some of those dead forms watching us. I quickened my pace, scared to death by the sight of them. They made no move to get any closer, simply stayed behind and watched us move along. The rain finally cleared and Marsh dropped the leaf. Along with the rain being gone, the fog lifted. A blue sky was overhead. For the first time, I could see the endless flatland littered with puddles. Some skeletons were standing, and others lay half inside the mud, unmoving as the dirty water dripped from their bones. Aside from the whole army of the undead staring at us, the bog was a beautiful place. The puddle of water reflected the blue sky above. So, I did save you and all. From what I've heard, you owe me, Marsh said, his hands nervously fiddling with the stem of the leaf. Creatures worked on a culture based on favors. This was the first time I've ever heard of some of them expecting someone to pay them back for saving another life. He was an agent and we were on an assignment. Having each other's back was just something we should do. Really, what would someone like you want from a human though? I wondered what was going on inside that head of his, standing proudly. He puffed up his chest, face beaming. Well, clearly that means you must become my friend. After all, you owe me a great deal. If I didn't notice you go under, you would have been dead by now. It's a fairly simple exchange, and honestly, I'm the one getting the worst end of the deal. As he spoke, things clicked into place, like why he requested someone like me to work with him, and why he handed over the ring in the first place. He smiled, his bottom lip under his top row of sharp teeth. I now knew that was a nervous smile hiding something. I was about to call him out on it all when a voice came from behind us. Are you two all right? Looking over, I gasped, seeing someone dressed in a suit dragging their feet along while carrying their shoes. Nick, I shouted, starting towards him. Marsh also cried out Nick's name, but in a very worried voice. He sounded like a child just caught doing something wrong and just seconds away from being grounded. I reached Nick, worried about him. He shouldn't be out in the field, let alone walking around in a place like this. He was winded from just walking through the bog. I gave him time to recover as Marsh joined us. His eyes were darting around in a guilty way. Nicky, why are you out here? I said when I thought he could speak again. I was worried about the intentions behind this job. He said finally. I was about to go into what I figured out when those skeletons started to move. Fear raced through my body again as hands came through the bog, this time around Nick's feet, tugging and pulling at his dirty pant legs. He didn't appear worried in the slightest. With a great deal of effort, he lifted his leg up, freeing his foot from the wet ground. Inside the dripping mud was a long string tangled on one dirty bare foot. He reached down to take it off and handed it to the reaching bone hands with a small apology. From what I could tell was these dead would only drag you down if you took a golden object you found. There must be so much of it hidden inside the mud for Nick to accidentally pick up a necklace while walking. Knowing they were basically harmless did not make them any less terrifying through. I figured out Marsh dragged me along to set up my life being in danger. That way he could rescue me, and then demand us to become friends. Marsh sputtered, hands raised trying to defend himself. He denied that was the reason why we were out there, that it was just a simple job his partner didn't want to do and needed a replacement. As he spoke, Nick's face turned a shade paler. He remained stone-faced, but I could tell Nicky was freaking out. He was forced out of the field. While he was gone, I was in danger without him being able to do anything about it. I understood his feelings. In a way, he turned his back for a few minutes and his partner almost drowned in a bog. The thought of what could have happened slowly sunk in, and Nick sunk down a little. I needed to quickly go over and support his weight or else he would have collapsed. You're not going to tell any of the higher-ups about this, right? Marsh asked, voice strained. I really wasn't upset over what happened. Yes, I nearly died and would have nightmares about it. The reason was so innocent, and as long as Marsh never pulled a stunt like this again, he was easily forgiven. I opened my mouth to say something, and Marsh assumed it was the worst possible outcome. He cut me off, tears in his eyes and hands shaking. You don't understand, I needed to do this. I used his pause to butt in. It's fine. I'm not overly mad. I'm just upset you went this far. You didn't need to save my life for us to be friends. You just needed to ask. I didn't follow. He replied with a blank look on his face. As far as I could tell, supernatural creatures really didn't have friends. They had people they liked, but didn't consider that as a friend. Everything they did had a cost behind it, so they didn't just do things for others they cared about for nothing. Friends are just two people who like being around each other. With humans, we'll do free favors because we like them. I can get that's hard for you to understand, but I considered us friends after we started to talk. And I think because you were the one who handed me the ring and put my life in danger in the first place, I don't owe you anything. Marsh was a bit ashamed of himself and nodded, accepting my words. For a moment he thought everything was for nothing when he thought back to the first part of what I said. He could get what he wanted just by asking. I was trying to help Nick along and Marsh swooped in to help, his face looking pretty pleased with himself as he got the two of us slowly back towards the door in the distance. We can still be friends, right? he asked as we moved along. As long as you don't do something like this again. Then yeah, I said, trying to hide a smile. Skylar is my friend, Marsh said, pretty proud of himself, almost trying to rub that fact into Nick's face. Nikki is my best friend though. That'll be almost impossible for you to top. This time Nick looked a bit pleased and Marsh fell into silence as if trying to figure out what a best friend was and how to gain that title. The dead still watched us as a silent warning to keep moving and not to overstay our welcome. We had really riled them up. As we got to solid ground, another person was standing there. He was angrily pacing back and forth, muttering and not even looking up as Nick and I got out of the mud near him. He was dressed in a suit, so I figured he was also an agent. His very expensive shoes were dirty. From what I could tell, this was Marsh's partner. Why was he here though? Marsh walked up, and I wasn't expecting his expression. His face fell and shoulders dropped. He was the tallest of all of us, and yet he was acting in a very demure way that didn't suit him. Marsh, what the hell do you think you're doing? Not only did you accept such a demeaning job, but you replaced me with a human. A human? Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? The man was shouting, saying human as if it was a dirty word. Marsh kept his head down and I hated how he looked. No wonder he was desperately trying to make a friend. This was what he needed to deal with on a daily basis. I just thought, Marsh started, his small voice getting cut off by his partner. You don't think I'm the one making all the decisions? You just strong-arm your way through what I've told you. It's the only reason why we have ever finished cases. No wonder why you've been tossed around from partner to partner if you pull stunts like this. Marsh was shrinking back from the tirade. I stepped forwards ready to kick this guy's ass when Nick straightened up. The other agent wouldn't even look in my direction because I was human. His eyes landed on Nick, who appeared utterly disgusted by the sight. I recommend you file an application for a new partner. You both are not suited for each other. You have no right to treat someone you should be trusting your life with in such a manner. I was pretty proud of Nicky for standing up for Marsh even though he did almost get me killed. What he said was right. I just didn't want Marsh thinking he was in the wrong. After being shuffled around, it would hurt getting paired with yet another person that might not work out. Scowling, the agent refused to listen to what Nick was saying. What give you the right to give us partner advice? I don't want to hear it from someone who killed theirs. Did you consider getting a new one or was show? A blur of movement came along with a loud crack through the air. The agent flew a few feet, his pristine suit getting dirty the moment he landed on the ground. Looking up in shock, one side of his pale face started to swell. Even his glossy black hair was knocked out of place. Marsh stood, hand still raised after slapping the hell out of his own partner. His back was towards us, making his face hard to see, but I could tell just how pissed off he was. How dare you say something like that? Do you have any idea how hard it is to do something like that? Unlike you, Nick cared about who he was working with. I don't know what happened, but I know he would have had a nearly impossible choice to make. A little whiny brat like you wouldn't know the first thing of the pain taking a life causes someone. You don't even fight. Ugh, I can't even leave you alone for a second. Marsh was unloading all his frustrations out in one rant, leaving his partner stunned. He was near the start of the bog, a glimmering coming from under his shirt sleeve. As Marsh ranted, the dead hands reached over after whatever the man was wearing. He noticed too late as those hands grabbed a hold, tugging at a very big and expensive-looking gold watch. He let out a cry of fear, his eyes filled with tears in a second. I let him struggle a bit as punishment before going over to help. Marsh held him as I undid the watch, letting the bog take it. We asked if he had any other gold on him and he was so scared he wasn't able to respond. Marsh needed to frisk his own partner, still frustrated. When he found nothing, he straightened up again. These two really should be separated for their own good. Nick watched the entire thing unfold silently. Taking out his phone, he started to dial. I'll call Ankar and request an express partner change for you too, he said, and that name snapped the poor agent from his shock. Ankar, you can't just call him, he said, still a bit stunned. Even Marsh looked pale by the name mentioned. Nick put his phone on speaker. After a few rings it connected and a voice I greatly disliked spoke. 2 minutes, Ankar said in a deep rumble showing how busy he was. I'm requesting a partner change for the deep Marsh set off in the east and July's Ridge, Nick said, and I was impressed he knew both of their names. That's it. Just submit the forms. My assistant can deal with it, unless those two are going to kill each other. There is no reason to contact me directly. Ankar was not at all happy by the call. He was a pretty big deal in the corporation, and I didn't know how Nick was perfectly calm while speaking with him. The tone of his boss started to sound as if he was going to come down and punish us for simply calling him. Nick looked over at July's and his swollen face starting to bruise. That is a possibility, Nick said finally, causing Ankar to growl. Fine, they are no longer partners. I cannot trust either in the field until I can look over what occurred. Marsh can work in the greenhouse, and July's shall be transferred over to assist with the financial records. Do not call me again for such petty reasons. With the crashing sound from a slammed handset, Anchor hung up in a rage. I looked over the three of them, wondering just what kind of trouble they were all in. Overall, it sounded as if it was the best outcome. They no longer needed to risk their lives in the field, and didn't need to see each other again. That went well. I thought he was going to come over here and chew us out. Literally, July said as he tried standing up. Marsh greatly disliked him, but helped the smaller man get back on his feet. We knew he wouldn't apologize for what he said, or anything he had put his partner through. At least he now appeared to respect Nick and Marsh enough not to speak ill about them again. I was ready to go home, not wanting to stay in a place with the dead watching, so we headed back to the doorway. The door opened to an office hallway which I assumed to be the corporation. With some arm twisting from Marsh, July gave Nick a very meek thank you and one to me for helping to get his watch off before the dead hands dragged him away. That slap had really done some good, or at least rattled his brain enough to give him some common sense. They went through the door, and we promised to keep in contact. A second after the door closed, it flew open to reveal a very worried and a bit angry Abarash. She looked us over, still caked in mud, with a displeased look. Crossing her arms, she addressed Nick first. "I told you to stay at home. You just got an extra few days added into your bed rest, mister. And Skylar, you should have sent him back the moment you saw him," she scolded. I gave her a nervous laugh. I didn't want to get Nick in trouble. I agreed with her as much as I approved of him running off because he was worried about his partner. Her anger only lasted as long as it took to adjust the door to drop me off in front of my apartment. Her kind mood returning, she reached over to gather us all into a big hug. "Good work today. You earned a night off, so go get washed up. I'll get Nick home for you," she said, not noticing how embarrassed I was. These clothes would never recover. The moment I got back, I was just going to get changed and throw them out. At least Nick got away with only ruining his pants and losing his socks. They were another thing the bog claimed that day. It was good that Abarash arrived to send us on our way. If she didn't, there was a risk of Nick and I talking about what July's had said. His first partner was a subject we tried our best to avoid. He was still recovering from her death and I didn't want to add to it. July should be glad Marsh was the one who got a hold of him first. After I got home that night and took a long shower, I risked a text to Abarash. First, I asked how Nick was doing. He was perfectly fine, just acting a bit grumpy from being forced to stay home longer. She sent back a message asking if anything else had happened that day because Nick's mood was a bit much for just being grounded. I quickly went over everything that happened. Her response took longer than normal. She was always so busy, it was to be expected. She asked me to give her a word-for-word account of what was said, as best as I could remember. I found that a bit strange. A few minutes passed and my phone started to ring. Whatever she wanted to say, she didn't feel like doing it over text. "Hey, what's up?" I asked her the moment I picked up. "Oh well, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the situation about Nick's other partner. How much do you know about it?" she said, her voice unusually strained. My heart fluttered a little by how the tone of the conversation changed. He was forced to kill her, right? He said he couldn't remember much about her because of the stress of what happened. Aside from that, nothing else. I don't even know her name. I thought I heard her breathe a sigh of relief. Whatever she was worried about, I was in the dark. You see, we've done our best to scrub any records of her name and, well, everything. It's for Nick's sake. We're certain he would crack again if he started to remember her. I really hoped he didn't even know how she died. But thankfully it seems as if he doesn't actually know how it happened. Please do me a favor and keep an eye on him. If somehow her name does reach him then. I just don't know what I would do if something happened to him because of it. Despite what was being said, I smiled a little. Abarash worried about Nick just as much as I did. She didn't need to come and get us today, and yet she did. I had planned to go digging to see if I could find anything about Nick's past. Now that wasn't an option. I wouldn't be able to find anything, and even if I did, I risked him also finding out. It was best to let Nick decide when he was ready to find out what happened before we met and to learn everything about the person he needed to bury. "I promise. Thank you for taking care of us," I said, truly meaning those words. "You two are very important to me, so take care of yourselves. I need to go. I shouldn't even be calling you right now. Take me out for dinner later." Without giving me a chance to respond, she hung up. I earned a few silent air pumps. Even to someone as dense as myself, I could tell she didn't mean dinner as a friend. Now, I just needed to figure out how to get a night off from between pie, work, and the other job I had where I nearly died every time I took a case, regardless of how harmless it may seem to start with.